Very nice to meet everybody. And it's my pleasure to be here. And as Simon mentioned, I'm the managing director of product at Autoware Foundation. And I'm also the chair of the privately owned vehicle work group, which aims to build a production-ready autonomous driving stack for automotive OEMs and tier ones. And that actually gave us a pretty interesting challenge because for OEMs, the main sensor is a camera. And we had to develop a vision-first approach with AI models for Autoware. And we've now also begun work on integrating end-to-end models and then also fusing kind of more, let's say, heuristic traditional neural networks like lane detection with end-to-end models, for example, for end-to-end path prediction, going from even AV 1.0 to AV 2.0 to even AV 3.0, where you have a safety model in parallel with an end-to-end model. And the title of my talk today is on our vision foundation model called AutoSeg. So with that, I'll stop my video and I'll begin the screen share. So just give me one moment, please. Simon, I think I might not be allowed to do the screen sharing. Oh, wait, 1 second. I think I can. I got it. I got it. No worries. No worries.
Okay.
Can everybody see the screen?
It's just 1 moment. Yes, we can see it now.
All right. Super. Is it now in full screen view or?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Awesome. So, yes, the title of my presentation today is AutoSeg, the open source vision foundation model for autonomy. Now, I wanted to begin by speaking about the motivation for building AutoSeg. I alluded to it briefly at the start, but I want to speak about it more deeply. Because if you look at the current state of some of the latest autonomous driving technologies and some of the cutting edge deployments, they are very advanced in many ways, and yet they still struggle with very critical edge case scenarios. These are just some examples of crashes that have occurred with autonomous driving systems. And the challenge is, in order for vehicles to go from, let's say, L2 or L2 plus or L2 plus plus or whatever the next iteration will be with more pluses, to a fully autonomous system, we really have to be able to tackle these edge case scenarios so that we can have a system that does not require constant human supervision and intervention. And this is not just symptomatic in one country or one market. It's something that is really happening around the world. And as companies are deploying more and more autonomous driving systems and they drive more miles, you'll see these same types of edge cases crop up. So really, we have to be able to tackle the long tail of edge case scenarios for, number one, obstacle perception, and also for driving corridor perception. And that's where the idea of AutoSeg comes in. Because really, if you look at the scenarios, they're still quite basic. And, cars really should not be having at-fault obstacle collisions like this one, or even with, for example, a small object like a child dummy, or in this case, a person stood by the road, an overturned truck, and the autonomous vehicle speeding at full speed and crashing into this truck over there. So these are some of those obstacle perception edge cases that still exist today. Although they are less prevalent in low speed scenarios, they do exist. So we really have to be able to have much better scene perception, much better generalization in the ability of models to recognize out-of-domain scenarios, out-of-domain objects, and to be able to not have these types of crashes. That's really the goal. And if you look at the types of crashes that have occurred, they are a combination of some kind of a stationary object, so it's hard to pick it up in radar, and some kind of an edge case like a truck or a police car or a tractor trailer. And that's true across the entire industry. And usually it's because you get too many false positives. So the idea is we have to have better vision so that we don't have these types of crashes, so that the industry can progress towards a higher level of autonomous driving. A lot of people think that the solution to this is LiDAR. And although LiDAR is a very good sensor, the limitation of LiDAR is its inability to capture the scene's geometry in adverse weather. And adverse weather is really where these edge cases appear the most. So here's an example of a real world scene with multiple sensors. So here you have, for example, a near infrared sensor, and it's not seeing much. The thermal imager isn't picking up much. The LiDAR point cloud is just obstructed by the snow from the vehicle, but in vision, you can still see that there are two cars. And so obviously radar is a very good sensor. We want to use radar as well, but we believe that the primary sensor for machine learning and especially perception should still be cameras. And so AutoSeg is a vision foundation model designed specifically to tackle these long tail edge case driving scenarios, and it is supported by a radar perception pipeline as well. And our aim is to be able to detect every obstacle, every single one, whether we've seen it or not, both in good and bad weather conditions, irrespective of what that obstacle is. And if you think about this mission statement, it's actually a very difficult machine learning problem because machine learning networks are very good at specific problems like detecting a traffic light, but they're very bad at detecting a broad array of potential presentations of different potential unknown objects. It just becomes a much more challenging data representation problem. So we've already made some great strides towards this. And one of the first networks I want to talk about is called SceneSeg. So SceneSeg is designed precisely to tackle long-tail edge case scenarios for obstacle perception. Now, it does semantic segmentation, but in a very unique way, because unlike most typical networks that are trying to predict a label per object category, such as car, bus, cyclist, pedestrian, truck, etc., we have created a single super class or super label called foreground object. And the network is able to learn implicitly the representation of all types of generic foreground objects in the scene and is able to generalize to objects that it has never encountered before in the training data. A great example of this is India. You see, Indian roads have all kinds of interesting objects from rickshaws, pedestrians, trucks, SUVs, all types of objects. In this video, you'll notice that in a few frames, a dog will run across the road and the network detects the dog, even though we never trained it to detect dogs in the data itself. It was able to generalize out of domain to these kinds of rare edge case scenarios. And there's a common saying that I talk about in the self-driving car space that if it will work in India, it will work everywhere. So that's the kind of idea behind this network, but it is also very useful for safety scenarios in edge cases, like people running out onto the road. In this example, a person crossing the road, an elderly man with a cane, or this old lady with a cane in Russia. Or what about when cyclists fall over, right? You have a lot of data of cyclists when they're on the bike. What happens when they fall off the bike? Or perhaps when cyclists are doing wheelies coming towards the vehicle. These are very strange scenarios. Also being able to segment and detect vehicles at strange angles and speeds that are not commonly encountered in the training data set. Or objects like a caravan or tires rolling down the highway. Now, with this network, we not only achieve very good precision, we achieve very good recall. So it's able to generalize to environments out of the box, like Dubai in the top left, LA in the top right, and the bottom left is Singapore, and bottom right was Istanbul. Now, with vision systems, the challenge is being able to do this at night in low light conditions, that we have very good low light performance. And same with rain. So here you can see that there are splashes on the road, raindrops on the camera lens, and we have very robust segmentation, even at highway driving speeds and torrential downpours, with the wiper going across the windscreen. Snow presents its own unique set of challenges because the entire appearance of the scene has changed. And we can't only limit the perception capabilities of our system to only operate in fair weather. This is a very interesting scene because in this scene, you'll notice that there is a police car. Oh, let me go back. I'm going to scrub this video to show you exactly where this happens. This is a very interesting scenario. One moment, please. just a few frames back. And I will play from here and present and pause. So there is a police car right there. And there is a recovery vehicle right there, both of which are known scenarios for accidents with other self-driving car systems. And we've encountered both of them in 2 seconds of driving. And other systems have failed in this exact scenario, whereas SceneSeg has been able to perform really well. So that's what I'm talking about, where not only does this network, as a purely open source network, have very good performance, it's also able to compete with, and in some cases surpass, the closed source competitive solutions by some of the really big players in the space. Here you can see it's a very foggy environment, really heavy snow, and we're able to detect the vehicle at very long range. And the last demo, I think, is one of the hardest ones of any company that I've ever seen, because it's nighttime, there's snow, there's sleet, it's high-speed driving, the wipers going across the screen, and everything is running very, very well. So this is one of the first models that we designed to specifically tackle these long-tail edge case scenarios. So how did we go about doing this? Well, the first thing I want to say is that with all of the models I will talk about today, they were all exclusively trained on open source data. So there's no data advantage that we have. We actually have a data disadvantage compared to others. So in order to train SceneSeg, we used 6 open source data sets. And the first challenge is that these open source semantic segmentation data sets each have their own labeling scheme. So the first step was to create a unified semantic ontology and to combine all of these semantic labels from these various data sets into a common description or a common language. And that gave us only 35,000 samples. In order to really extract more in terms of feature distribution, we applied very heavy data augmentations, simulating rain, snow, dirt, noise, pixel jitter, HSV shift, value shift, and much more. In the training, there was nothing too fancy. It was just a cross-entropy loss. But the real kind of science was in the network architecture, which I'll talk about later down in a few slides. We achieved very good performance in terms of the MIOU score on validation and test data. So this network SceneSeg is really one of the core networks for obstacle perception that can be applied across Autoware, not just for privately owned vehicles. But in order to achieve safety, it's not enough to just have one really good network. You should have multiple really good independent networks that try and answer the same question. Is there an object in front of me? Should I slow down? Should I speed up? So this is our second object perception network called Scene3D. Scene3D is a monocular depth estimation network. It takes raw pixels as input and outputs a per pixel depth map. So here you can see that objects close to the scene are yellow in the foreground. Objects that are further away are in darker shades of blue. At the moment, this network is operating in the relative depth space, but it's very easy to fine-tune this with metric depth as well. And again, I like to show examples from challenging scenes because it really highlights the performance of the network. Now, with depth estimation networks, the biggest challenge is kind of an over-smoothing at the depth boundaries. But if you look up, you'll notice that there are trees over here, and we get very good depth outlines, even on the leaves of the trees, on the branches of the trees, on thin poles and vertical objects. So it shows that we have a very good kind of edge precision. And that wasn't an accident. We actually penalized the edge loss in a very specific and targeted way within the network training itself. Even up here, you can see the detail on these leaves and the poles. So this network, again, is able to generalize in a very effective way because it's just taking monocular images as input. So it does not require LiDAR, it does not require supervision, it doesn't even require stereo cameras. And this was extremely important because our goal is an automotive customer, and automotive OEMs are constrained with what they can put in the vehicle. Here you can see all of the traffic cones appearing in the depth map, even this construction vehicle appearing in the depth map there. So it's again a different layer of safety. And the idea is that if SceneSeg has a particular, mean time between failure, let's say 10 to the minus 5 hours of driving, and Scene3D has a particular failure of, let's say, 10 to the minus 4 hours, when you combine these two independent networks, you get a system that's around 10 to the minus 9 hours of mean time between failure. And by doing this kind of combinatorial approach, you can actually get to the level of safety required to have full autonomous driving, even in highway speeds. Now, with depth estimation with cameras, rain is very, very challenging because you get blurring. You also get reflections on the road surface. And here you can see just how heavy the rain itself is. And yet we have a fairly stable and nice looking depth map. The other challenge that you'll notice is that with a lot of these monocular depth estimation networks, the scale of the scene changes on a frame by frame basis, and you get a lot of flickering artifacts in the depth. But you'll notice that with Scene3D, the scale is fairly stable, and we don't get this kind of constant flickering between foreground and background labels. So as I showed you earlier, we were able to deal with different weather conditions, whether it's rain, snow, very good edge recall, even picking up like this little drum, this little signboard here. You'll notice that there are these poles in the middle of the highway, and you can even see them in the median here. This truck is also visible. So you're seeing the same scene, right? The one I showed earlier with the police car. So you have the same image going to two networks, both networks trying to estimate the kind of perception of the scene and giving you this very critical safety information for not having at-fault autonomous driving crashes. And here you can see the network is also doing a great job in these foggy conditions, but it's also a very effective solution for edge cases like vehicle cut-ins, when a vehicle cuts across your path, or a child running across the road, a cow running across the road like this. This skateboarder has a fall. Next scenario is also interesting, a blown out tire. You also have, again, this truck colliding with infrastructure, right? You can't put a bounding box on that. Or this crate of oranges that tumbles down the road, and you can see it here in the depth map. Or cars that are skidding and kind of completely losing control, but it's still visible as a foreground object here. Even in a very weird orientation. This is probably in the UK. And this last video is just very, very bizarre. So, this happens, right? You have to be able to deal with this. You can see the motorbike over there as well. So this is the kind of approach that we have for being able to tackle these edge case scenarios. Now, training this network was not easy by any stretch. We actually tried a number of approaches that did not work before we landed on the one that was successful. So this was actually trained through a type of model distillation approach. So we created pseudo depth labels from depth anything V2 as the kind of teacher model, and we used their large VIT vision transformer model. And we ran that on open source driving data sets from Mapillary, Roadwork, Comma10K, Kitty, pretty much everyone that we could download and fit on a computer. And we got all of those pseudo labels. And the important thing to understand is that our networks are not transformers, they're CNNs. So it was a pretty big task to take this very large transformer network and distill it to a lightweight CNN. We ended up with about 480,000 samples. Again, we applied very heavy augmentations, but we did it in two phases. The first phase, we applied augmentations. In the second phase, we didn't, to allow the network to do a bit more fine-tuning. Now, one of the key innovations was the loss. So we had a multi-scale edge loss that was looking at coarse and fine edges. We did 4 different scales that allows the network to learn the shape of objects as well as the fine details. In order to get the network to have stable prediction of the pseudo labels, we did a min-max normalization, and we applied a mean absolute error on the data term to create a scale invariant loss. Now, normally, if you read the literature, the typical scale invariant loss did not work, but min-max normalization did work. And that was the real challenge because we tried about 10 different normalization techniques before we found that this one worked the best. And it is the simplest, actually. And we had a two-stage training process. The first was with a bigger batch size and a larger learning rate, and the other was with a much smaller batch size and a smaller learning rate for the fine-tuning. And we were about 92% accurate compared to depth anything V2 as measured by the loss function. So we achieved a very good benchmark in terms of Scene 3D as well. Now, the third network is called DomainSeg, which actually I should say has just finished training last night on my computer. And DomainSeg is a very important neural network because it does semantic segmentation of roadwork scenes. You know, a lot of the crashes that I showed you happened in roadwork environments because you can put a traffic cone everywhere, right? A construction worker can just move a traffic cone on a day-by-day basis. So this network takes as input a monocular image and segments all of the important traffic cones, bollards, and other such roadwork objects. And here you can see an example of the input image and the semantic segmentation output. And we'll be making a demo video of this as well. Now, in order to train this network, we relied upon the open source roadwork dataset by Carnegie Mellon University. We applied a similar strategy that we did for SceneSeg. So we made it a super class combined of multiple individual classes. So we combined labels for cone, drum, tubular marker, and I think one more class like a barrier from each of the labels into a single common semantic class. So just fusing the data into having the most general purpose definition as possible. But this is such a rare edge case that there are very few open source data sets. In fact, this is the only one that was pretty decent in our opinion. Even this one had a lot of errors and mislabels, but we had about 7,500 training samples. So it was a very small data set. For augmentations, we did minor augmentations because the kind of upstream elements of the network were shared. So the kind of backbone and other parts had gone through the hardening of augmentations. And most of the time, these traffic cones are of a similar color. So initially we turned them off, then applied some augmentations, and then did a bit of fine tuning at the end. So it was a kind of on cycle for the augmentations, and that seemed to work pretty well. Nothing too fancy in the loss function. It's a binary segmentation. So we did binary cross entropy with logits. And the performance was a 40 on MIOU. And you might say that's a very small number. But you have to realize that often the foreground class is highly underrepresented in the image. So even, let's say, a few pixels error can have a big impact on IOU, given how most of these cones are tiny. So although 40 is a lower number than 90, you must understand that the actual number of pixels in the scene we're dealing with is fairly small. So even, let's say, 10 pixels of over-segmentation can lead to a much bigger impact on IOU. And obviously, this is a small data set. So I expect that if we were to have, let's say, 30,000 samples or 50,000 samples, we'd be able to bump the MIOU score up considerably. But for now, even in its current state, I think it's a fairly useful network for this edge case scenario. And as we get more and more data, hopefully from open source contributions, we'll be able to improve this even further. The fourth network we're developing is called EgoSpace. This is also currently in training, and this is our free space segmentation network. Again, nothing too fancy, similar architecture and binary cross entropy loss. So we'll be able to share more about the specific performance, but the data sets that we're using for this are SceneSeg frames, mapillary vistas, and comma 10K. The interesting thing is that the SceneSeg data is 4K. So we did a crop to simulate a narrow image, and we retained the original and downsampled it to have a wide angle. And for these ones, mapillary and comma, we just used off-the-shelf labels. So we got about 150,000 samples. This one is being trained at the moment, so we'll be able to hopefully share the results pretty soon in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And so that's kind of our approach to do obstacle perception, having SceneSeg, having Scene 3D, having DomainSeg, having EgoSpace, having all of these networks telling us what's safe, what's not safe. And I believe that together they can be combined to create a very sophisticated and robust obstacle perception pipeline that should hopefully be able to avoid the types of edge case scenarios that I showed earlier. Now, obstacle perception is only half of the challenge, right? The other part of the challenge is driving corridor perception. So where should the car drive? Now, with highways, most of the time, this is pretty simple because the driving corridor is defined by lane markings, and they're very clear. It's like a white line on a black background. It's designed to make it very, very visible for human beings. And so most of the time, AI systems, neural networks, achieve an accuracy on par or better than humans for lane detection. And because the feature is so simple, it's like a white line on a black background, these networks generalize very well. However, there are many scenarios where lane detection is simply insufficient in discriminating the driving corridor. Like in this scene, as a human being, I know where to drive, but how do I tell a self-driving vehicle where it should drive in this scene? Because there are no lanes. As a human being, I can see that there are other vehicles. I can see this very faded line. I can see the road edge. I can see the perspective of parallel road elements, and I know the kind of focus of expansion. So we have to be able to capture those types of features as well. Even if the road has lane markings, they can become occluded, they can become invisible because of glare or splashes or rain. And sometimes they can be completely covered. So you could have a very well-maintained highway and then the whole road is covered in snow. So how does a vehicle drive autonomously in these conditions? If it's full autonomy, it should be able to tackle these scenarios. Most people think that the approach to solve this challenge is to build an HD map. Now, with an HD map, you would drive this specific road in good weather, you would hand draw the lane lines, and then you would localize with respect to the infrastructure. And so the map would act like a kind of virtual sensor. So when the light perception fails, you rely on the map, and the map is like your perception sensor. The problem is that it does not scale, and it can also fail in scenarios where the map is out of date with respect to the real scene, like roadworks. Like in this scenario, you could have had a very beautiful annotation of where you should drive, and then in the real world, it's completely different. So does your car go straight or does it follow the cones? That's one very simple scenario proving why this approach doesn't work. Now, what we want to do is to tackle this with better AI, to build an end-to-end path prediction system that can directly infer the driving corridor just by looking at the image like a human being does, and then rely upon lane detection as a backup system to ensure safe and valid driving trajectories. And if we come into a scenario where the two systems diverge, we know that something kind of tricky is happening. And we also have DomainSeg telling us where the cones are. So we can tell the human driver to pay attention or tell the human driver to eventually do a handover as well. So having this kind of combinatorial approach of both lanes and end-to-end path prediction. So our end-to-end path network is called EgoPath. This is a kind of example of what we want the network to be able to achieve. So you just look at the image, look at the scene, and predict where you should drive. This is not saying the speed along the path. It's not a trajectory prediction. It's just a spatial path prediction. And then we have our lane net called EgoLanes. Both of these networks are being trained at the moment. So I don't have all of the details to share with you because we're still doing experiments on data sets, experiments on loss functions. I saw some results just this afternoon on EgoPath, and they look pretty amazing. So I'm excited to be able to share those with you when they're available. But we've done something pretty special in the way that we want to train this network. Almost always, these end-to-end networks take a perspective image as the input, and they predict the path in world coordinates. Essentially, the network needs to implicitly learn depth. And the challenge is such networks struggle to generalize to different cameras and different mounting positions. In many cases, they require hundreds, if not thousands of hours of additional driving to be able to generalize. What we want to do is have zero-shot generalization. So no matter whether it's a wide-angle camera, a narrow-angle camera, a camera on a truck, a camera on a bus, a camera on a saloon or an SUV, we want to design these networks, especially the end-to-end network, in such a way that it can generalize. And so our approach is to actually train the network on an intermediate representation that can be made very easily for all of these different situations. And the way we do that is we create a bird's eye view image through inverse perspective mapping, and this is fed as the input to the network. Now, all you have to do to create a bird's eye view image is have 4 pairs of points that correspond to a flat world. And you can do that in pixel space, not in metric space. So you just take this image, you squish it to a bird's eye view. This bird's eye view goes into the network. The network predicts the path and the lanes directly in the bird's eye view, and you can retransform it into your pixel space. And then you can use any kind of metric calibration to know where those pixels are in true world coordinates. To the best of my knowledge, this has not really been done before, especially for end-to-end models. And it was not a simple thing for us to do. So we had to develop an automatic pipeline that could look at this image, look at some basic labels that we have from open source data, like where are the ego lanes, and automatically transform into bird's eye view. And we've done that so far for a first data set with about 130,000 images. We've done our first training run just today, and we've got some very impressive results, which I'm excited to be able to share with you in the near future. So I wanted to just give you a bit of background to the way in which we want to build these end-to-end path prediction networks, as well as how we want to predict the the lane networks as well. And one last thing is, obviously you can have path, you can have lanes, but the car needs to know where to drive, especially if you want to have navigation. So we don't want to rely on an HD map, but we want to use an ADAS or 2D map, because a human being can look at this picture and look at this picture and navigate on highways and take junctions and manage exits. And so we want to also fuse the real-time perception with 2D maps to be able to create a kind of live perception of the scene that is holistic and anchored with navigational data. And this is something that I have done some work on in the past. In my previous startup, I was founder CEO, and we actually developed a framework to be able to take navigational map data, simple 2D data, real-time perception, fuse the two to be able to create what we call a living map representation. So taking the navigational input and anchoring it with respect to the real scene. This is an example of a road in the UK. You can see we know how many lanes there are, what the name of the road is, but notice that roadworks are happening. So in a normal HD map, the edge of the road would be over there. But in our case, the map has been adjusted online in real time based on the road perception of the vehicle to be able to anchor it to the real world scene, because it kind of moves around. And you can see it goes all the way to the horizon. And we also understand junctions. We understand the entire road topology. And this is the kind of thing that we can do in Autoware as well, in the open source domain. So here you can see it's working in kind of off-highway environments, both with oncoming roads as well as kind of roads that are going straight. It gives you this also kind of path prediction queue, kind of the thing you're trying to build with EgoPath, but this is coming from the map itself. And once the lanes appear, the kind of map comes back. So a lot of people think this may not be feasible, but I know not only is it feasible, it's possible. And we're excited to be able to do this kind of fused implementation between navigational data and real-time perception in Autoware. Now, all of that explanation brings me to the kind of main crux of the presentation, which is AutoSeg. So what is AutoSeg? What is this open source vision foundation model? Well, really, it is all of the things that I showed you in one network. That's exactly what we've done. We've actually designed a single network with a single backbone that is able to have all of these different predictions in a very, very efficient form factor. So the images come in, we use a common backbone, and different branches have a specialization. So sometimes this is called a Hydra net, sometimes it's called an ensemble of experts. So I just call it our vision foundation model. So here you can see we have Scene3D, SceneSeg, DomainSeg, EgoSpace, the Bev transform, EgoPath, and EgoLanes. Now, one of the key innovations that we developed was a context block. Now, this entire architecture is a CNN, it's a convolutional neural network. It's not a transformer. And CNNs are very good at kind of fine pixel information, but they're not so good at global context. So the context block kind of mimics the self-attention and cross-attention mechanisms found in transformers, helping our networks to be able to capture the overall scene context in terms of what the object is and what is around that object. So this is the kind of overall architecture of AutoSeg as a single vision foundation model. And all of these networks have been trained where the upstream elements are shared. So for example, both EgoSpace, DomainSeg, and SceneSeg have the same backbone, the same scene context block, and the same scene neck block. The only difference is in the output head. And this type of architectural decision helps us have the most efficiency and least overhead in terms of the computation required to achieve the output that we are aiming for. So like I mentioned, it's an ensemble of experts, Hydra net style architecture with shared features. The backbone is an efficient net B0, fine-tuned on automotive data. So one of the most lightweight backbones you could think of. As I mentioned, the context block is a novel block designed to simulate the kind of self-attention and cross-attention mechanism in a transformer. The neck does multi-scale fusion with skip connections from upstream layers. And the head is the kind of final prediction, whether it's a segmentation output, a depth map, or key points. And here you can see the number of parameters. So overall, this entire architecture is only 100 million parameters. That includes all of the networks. But it's very modular, so you can pick and choose the specific ones you want. You can run just EgoPath if you want to, or you can run the whole thing. But overall, it's a very lightweight model. And our goal is to be able to compress the model, do quantization, and hopefully get it to run in around 15 to 20 int8 tops. We've already had some great success in quantizing the SceneSeg network, where we're now in an int8 precision with only a 3% drop in MIRU score. So we're making excellent progress on taking these models to embedded ECUs for automotive deployment. And the implementation details of the training pipeline, the data sets, the way we loaded the data, all of this stuff is available fully open source, as well as the models themselves in different formats like PyTorch or Onyx or quantized int8 Onyx. Everything is available on GitHub. So you can just go to our GitHub, it's Autoware Foundation / Autoware.privately owned vehicles, and you can see everything there from the training pipeline, the dataset parsing pipeline, the actual trainer, the class, the loss function, how everything has been implemented, as well as examples of how to run inference on video data, on images, and you can run any image. Like I've run these networks on YouTube videos, so you don't have to worry about specific cameras or specific formats, just an RGB image comes in and information comes out. I also wanted to just touch upon the fact that although we've done a lot of work on vision, we're not only limited to vision, we're also developing a radar vision fusion pipeline where we're taking the radar point cloud, taking the vision outputs, and also having a learned representation. So having a kind of end-to-end vision radar fusion pipeline to be able to estimate bounding boxes and static obstacle occupancy directly in point cloud. And the idea is that we will train this first with, let's say, 4D radar, but in the future, you can slot in the Scene3D depth map or a LiDAR point cloud. So our goal is to be able to make this pipeline as well as generalizable as possible so that it can be used across different application domains. And although this is, very interesting research, it's also important to realize that it's anchored in a product strategy. So our goal is to be able to bring these networks to market in a specific form factor to achieve a product goal. And the first goal that we have is to build a system called Vision Pilot. Vision Pilot does SAE level 3, so true hands-off, eyes-off autonomous driving without any requirement for human supervision at full highway speeds with or without a lead vehicle in lane. And it uses the same models running on front-facing cameras, either 2 cameras or a single 8-megapixel camera, because we can then effectively have wide-angle imaging as well as long-range imaging. And to augment that, we have a 4D radar that has XYZ data plus Doppler velocity, or you could say range, azimuth, elevation, and Doppler. And the goal is to be able to have a TRL7, so an automotive-ready implementation of this stack around the end of this year. So automotive-grade sensing, automotive-grade compute, the networks running online, being able to showcase that the perception is able to deliver the results in the embedded form factor. The next version is called Vision Pilot Plus. Vision Pilot Plus introduces surround view radar perception to enable us to do lane changes. Vision Pilot Pro has surround view cameras and a navigation map to kind of build that real-time map fused road perception model that I demoed earlier. And that can then do kind of lane changes and exits and merges. So you can do a multi-highway journey. And the final version is called Vision Drive, which is like your ultimate version. You don't have to ever drive a car on highways again. And we believe that the way that they tackled that is to have infrared cameras. So long wave infrared for pitch black driving, short wave infrared for fog and dust and smoke. And perhaps an OEM may be interested in adding a LiDAR at this stage for further redundancy if they wish. So we're building, and doing research, but the goal is to actually take this research to market in a proper product form factor. And we would like for Vision Pilot, the radar plus vision stack to run in around 30 to 50 int 8 tops. Again, so that it conforms with the type of compute requirements that are needed by an automotive OEM. The last thing I wanted to mention is that as we've kind of developed this technology and brought it to market, we've gotten excellent feedback and results. Some of our networks are under trial right now with an automotive OEM for their series production vehicle for a level 2 autonomous driving feature. We have trials planned with some very big automotive players for demos at the end of this year and further integrations. So I would just say that stay tuned. And if you're interested in this research, I would welcome you to participate. Our work group meetings are open. Anybody can join. You can talk with us. We can kind of share ideas. You can try out the code. I can help you get up and running. But really the goal is to have these models be the open source substrate for the self-driving car industry, because I believe that open source unlocks that capacity. Linux is the go-to choice for servers, so why can't Autoware be the go-to choice for self-driving? Please get in touch with me. That's my email address. This is a QR code from my LinkedIn. So I really appreciate you listening to me. I hope you found the presentation interesting, informative, and useful. And I'd be happy to take any questions which you may have.